Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you an interview from the archives with Wendy Van de Poll. She is a pet grief support coach, and we have a conversation about coping with grief after the death of an animal companion. And she also shares some tips for how to make the dying process easier for an animal companion. And I think this is a really important interview for those of us who love our pets and our animal friends in our lives. And so I hope that you'll enjoy it and find it really helpful to you as well. Make sure you've subscribed to this channel down below if you haven't already, and also subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. Go to eoluniversity.com/support if you're willing and able to make a small contribution that will help keep this channel and the podcast on the air. So we'll move on now with my conversation with Wendy Van de Poll. Here we go. Hello and welcome to End of Life University. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and I'm so glad you've joined me today for another episode. I'm happy to welcome my guest, Wendy Van de Poll, who is a certified end-of-life and pet grief support coach, a certified pet funeral celebrant, animal medium, and communicator. She is the founder of the Center for Pet Loss Grief and an international best-selling and award-winning author and speaker. And I'm really excited to welcome Wendy today because I've wanted to cover the topic of pet loss grief for quite some time now. And so I'm thrilled that Wendy's here. You can learn more about her work at her website, which is centerforpetlossgrief.com. So Wendy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Karen, I'm so glad to be on your show. I'm really excited.
Well, yes, as I said, I've been looking forward to covering this topic because I think it's such an important one and something that gets overlooked often in our society. But before we get started, Wendy, would you just tell us a little bit more about your own story? How did you first get interested in working with people who are grieving over the death of a pet?
Oh, my, Karen, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I lost my dog Marley to a very tragic disease. She was 12 years old. She was a very young 12 years old. And it inspired me, her passing inspired me to refocus the work that I do for animals and their people. At that time, I was working as a massage therapist for 16 years for humans, horses, and hounds. And when I moved to rural New Hampshire, my practice went from being a practice focused on show horses and agility champions to people that just loved their animals and had horses, in their backyards to go hacking with, and their dogs and so on and so forth. And people would start calling me once they knew I was a massage therapist to help them during pet hospice. They wanted to do something nice for their animals. And I didn't advertise this, and it basically just came into being. So I grew in this field. There wasn't anybody doing this 20 years or plus years ago. And I had to, find ways to, to refocus my work. So I just kept researching. And I became a life coach because that also did help to help people and figure out where they are in their lives, what they want in their lives, and move forward. And then I had the opportunity, it was really wonderful, to study an 18-month program to become certified in end-of-life and loss. And this was not for animals, this was for people. So when I spoke to the teacher, I said, I don't want to work with people in hospice or dying and things like that, but I definitely want to work with animals. Could you work with me? And he said yes. And so he made sure that part of the program was really focused towards me and my work that I wanted to do. So then it just basically grew. I mean, and it was, it's just, Karen, how sometimes the universe just gives you what you're supposed to do. I was getting called for people that wanted me to actually be at euthanasias, which I find extremely, extremely honorable and just so sacred of a time, because I get to support the animal that is dying, to help them feel calmer and less anxiety. But I also get to help the people that are pretty much, in that stage of shock, rawness, and chaos. And it's a very personal event, and it's not easy all the time for me, but I also, I feel very blessed that I can do this. So that's basically how I became to, become certified and offering this work.
Thanks for sharing that, Wendy. I'm always fascinated to hear how people get called to start working with end-of-life issues in general, because there's always an interesting story behind it, and most people end up saying, "Oh, I found my true calling. This is where I really belong, doing this work."
Yeah. And I think, in our society, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm a biologist by training. I have a master's degree in biology, so I get the whole, cycle of life thing and studied it greatly. I studied wolves for my master's, and, sometimes the study animals would die, and it was tough. And so I was seeing it all around and seeing people's reactions. So I've always been cued in to how people react to death. And I think in our society, we do have an interesting relationship to the death process. And oftentimes it's something we don't want to look at. And we don't want to look at our own mortality. We're afraid to talk about it because we're afraid that we're going to die. There's just so many things that go into it. And we also, as a society, try to rush. We are living in this world now where everything is on fast forward. And, I don't want to be grieving. I get clients that call me, I don't want to be grieving. I need to go to work, and or I should be over it by now. People are telling me I should be over it by now. And those are all just, crazy myths. So it's so important for us to slow down and look at the cycle of life and what it can actually teach us as humans. It's very important.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, as much as, our whole society is in denial of our own death as humans and our own grieving process, but I've noticed in particular, we sort of devalue the grief experience after someone loses a pet. At least that's how it appears to me. And so I wanted to ask you, why do you feel like it's important for us now to really focus in and start paying attention to the grief over losing a pet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love that question. And it's multifaceted and multi-leveled. The one thing that I do want to say is that our society is, in fact, very slowly warming up to the fact that pet loss grief is real. I see it in the news. I see it on Facebook. And, I see these little blurbs like, oh, this company is giving pet loss grief days, for their employees so that they can stay home with pay. That is just so cool. And I love when I see things like that. But there are those things that can really knock us down. We think our best friends, our bestest friends, but they say something to us or they look at us that just makes it really difficult. So we, as people, as pet lovers, there are so many things for us to pay attention to. And the number one thing that I tell my clients is self-care, is to really, when if you have, the chance, if it's not sudden death or unexpected death and you're going into pet hospice, self-care, getting massages, finding support groups that will really work and that are led by trained individuals that know what they're doing, healthy eating, finding those safe and supportive friends, and finding those people that you might not even know yet, that will really get what you're going through. It's so important to pay attention to things that are going to help heal and support body, mind, and spirit. Grief is crazy. It's chaotic. It's a roller coaster ride. It's something we hate. I know before I knew what I know now, I used to hate it when I felt like I was grieving. I felt like I was a monster with two heads, and, the world was looking at me like I was nuts or crazy. But I encourage people, and I encourage your listeners, and I help my clients by learning how to experience grief as a friend. I know that sounds weird, but basically, take grief by the hand, look at it with kindness and love and courage, because grief has a life of its own. It can take off uncontrollably, and if you're not kind to yourself, you're not taking care of yourself, you can really get swept up in that tornado.
Mm-hmm.
And it does take courage. And grief, another thing to pay attention to is that grief takes work. My clients that do the work, they develop amazing relationships, new and amazing relationships, believe it or not, while their pet is still in pet hospice. And this is what people fear. Is, oh my goodness, my animal is so sick. We can't go hiking. We can't do this. We can't do that. I don't know what I'm going to do. I am beside myself. I don't feel like I'm giving enough to my dog or my cat or my horse or my bird. And I'm lost. I'm lost. My dog is dying. My cat is dying. What do I do? That's why I named my books the way I did, because that's what people say to me. And those that do the work, they learn how to self-care, take care of themselves, learn about grief. Just gives that little extra edge and support and compassion of taking care of that crazy and wonky and raw grief that will create chaos in somebody's head.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Well, Wendy, I notice on your website that you advocate creating an end-of-life plan for pets, which I'd never really thought about before. And so I was really curious about that. Why do you feel like that's a good idea? And then what would an end-of-life plan include for a pet?
Yeah, so important. I'm a list girl. I don't know about you, Karen, but I love to make lists and checklists and plans. I basically just started doing this through my own grieving process a long time ago when I was losing my first dog. And I started to make just basically some daily task lists for myself, and then I would check them off. So that might be like, simple thing like empty the dishwasher, paint the molding, clean out the bathroom drawers or whatever. And it was just a way to give my mind, give my soul, give the grief a chance to just breathe. It's important for us it was like, again, self-care. But when there's an end of life plan, if you have this chance to do this, if your animal is in pet hospice, there are so many things you can do while your animal is still living. What it basically does is, it, like what I just mentioned in self-care, it can help the process be less chaotic, so that you're not giving grief all the attention, but you've managed, you recognize your grief, you're going through grief, you know what it is, but what it allows you to do is then, with an end-of-life plan, be able to spend the quality time with your animal while they're dying. Because that, for people that have gone through this, we all know this is one of the most special and unique times that we have with our animals. And when I'm working with clients, I'm saying, people, do this, get an end-of-life plan, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, is because you want the biggest emotion that comes up with pet loss grief is guilt. And one of those things that goes along with the guilt is, I feel guilty because I didn't do enough. I feel like I didn't do enough, or I could have done it different. Having an end-of-life plan keeps you focused and able to create some new memories and new adventures with your pet. Okay. So basically, like I mentioned, they're checklists. It helps to keep anxiety and feelings of grief in check. So that's basically like the person's end-of-life management plan. The other thing is making a calendar. And the calendar would actually have, say your pet is medications, putting all of that on paper. It sounds a little ridiculous to put things like cuddle time on the couch, but seriously, that is huge when grief is flying around in your head and in your soul. Because when you look at that calendar and you say, oh man, I don't know if I can do it anymore. I just don't know. What am I going to do? It's like, oh wait, today, 4 o'clock, oh, it's 3:55, 4 o'clock, it's time to cuddle, and it's just one of those things. The other part of this is, by having an end-of-life plan, is having a team. Know who your team is ahead of time. Don't leave it up to your veterinarian, all right, to make the choices. Have a plan. Have a team of veterinarians. Maybe you have a holistic veterinarian. Maybe you have your regular veterinarian, and then you have your specialists. Have them all on board. This, as much as we hate to make this decision, euthanasia is important. Knowing this ahead of time, so that when the day comes when that decision has to be made, you're not scrambling. You know what your plan for euthanasia is. Okay, I'm going to call my holistic veterinarian or the veterinarian that travels to do euthanasias, and I have the phone number here on my checks on my list, so I know exactly. I don't have to scramble. This, again, allows you to spend time with your pet that's who's needing you at the most right now, okay, because it's all about them at this point. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the other is to really know who your support team is. I hate to say it, Karen, but most of the time I hear my own experience and working with thousands and thousands of people all over the world, the ones that let us down are our best friends and our family. I hate to say that, but that, in my experience, that's what I see. So start looking now if you're going through pet hospice. It might be the person in the grocery store checkout person that really gets your pet loss grief and has been there and is not going to judge. It may be, somebody else that you might not even know. It might be somebody in a support group if you're into that. So start, you don't have to have that part all down unless you're going through, a support group right now. But, knowing, who you're going to look up, who you're going to reach out to when the day comes, when you have to make that end of life decision.
So it makes sense, much like we encourage people to do their own end-of-life planning to make sure they feel prepared, that they've thought through what those last weeks and months could be like. And it makes sense that we would do the same for our pets, because the more we've prepared, then the more we're going to feel on top of it in a way, even though things will probably still be chaotic, but we will feel like we've thought through some of the scenarios and people we're going to call. We've already thought about how we feel about euthanasia, and have some information about that gathered in advance. And then I love the idea of the calendar and putting cuddle time on the calendar so that it doesn't get forgotten, because I think you can easily get so caught up in the moment and with all the details and the providing care that you forget about those really important moments of just togetherness.
Exactly, because we do forget them, Karen. And I speak from my own experiences. In the beginning, I remember my first dog is, I really had to hustle, and that was the focus, was hustle. And I knew after that experience, it's like, I'm never going to do it this way again, because I wasn't prepared. She was in hospice, but I didn't know how to do it. I knew there was a better way to do it. But the other thing too I want to add is, this is something there's two things we don't really want to look at either, or it's difficult to look at, or is, what our own feeling of unresolved grief is. Do we have anything going on in our lives that we may have not dealt with, and that we might, it might have been, the death of another pet or a partner, or not even a death, a move or some type of a loss. Have we dealt with that? Because if we haven't done the work, it's going to compound. And I like to call it stacking. So those feelings are going to stack. And then when you're going through the act of grieving and the act of dying process, the grief can actually be heightened. And people don't understand why their grief is heightened. It's usually because of unresolved grief. The other thing is, and this is important, because again, I believe I empower my clients to make their decisions and to be in control of their decisions. Yes, get the experts' opinions on euthanasia and all that. That's necessary. But for the things that we, as people, not as a veterinarian, can make decisions about is, what activities we're doing with our animals, how we're going through pet hospice, how, what are we going to do after the euthanasia? Are we going to allow the vet to take care of the body? Are we going to take care of our own pet's body? Do you want ashes? Do you want to just a burial if your town approves that in your backyard? Those are all the things to have in your end-of-life plan, and feel confident about those and feel good about them, and because you've made educated choices and heartfelt choices and, soul choices that this was the right for you and your pet. And those are all the things that really, really help with, some of the guilt feelings and the normal feelings of guilt, grief.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And I can really see the importance of it. And Wendy, you mentioned that oftentimes it's your family members and friends that kind of let you down in a way when you're dealing with pet grief, who maybe don't understand the grief. Is it people who don't own pets themselves who don't understand how close humans and their pets can become? Or I mean, I'm just curious about it. Like, why is it that some people struggle to understand the depth of grief over a pet that has died?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it warms my heart tremendously when I talk to a client that is grieving and they tell me, my best friend is right here, you know, supporting me all the way. It actually brings tears to my eyes. And even telling you, I get kind of like a little choked up and teary, because that just warms my heart when I hear that. Part of it is, Karen, is it can be, you know, anybody. It doesn't matter, you know, if you're a veterinarian or a pet sitter or a, you know, dog shower or just a regular, you know, old pet lover. It depends on our relationship to death and dying. I find the more people that understand it, get a hold of it, and say, you know, kind of not, you know, that just understand and have the knowledge that it isn't a bad thing and it's going to happen to all of us, you know, and it's part of life. There's a little bit more understanding. Part of, you know, and again, I've been there. I mean, there's things we don't know. We're not trained how to support each other in the process of death and dying, whether it's humans or people, or humans or dogs, or cats, or birds, or fish, or snakes. You know, we're not trained in how to give loving compassion to each other during these times. I had a client last week that she was so astute, and she said, you know, her dog died, and she was sitting at a light right after the euthanasia, and a funeral procession came by. And I mean, talk about, and she said, I was just in tears, not because I lost my dog, but people were beeping their horns at the funeral procession. She said, we just don't give time for each other to let us grieve. And that was just so profound, and the way she said it and what she was going through, that melted my heart again. Yeah.
It's so true. So I guess really our avoidance of pet loss grief is just a symptom of the whole picture of our society, difficulty with death and grief in general. And then some people, well, like I was saying, some people who don't have pets may have a hard time relating to why a pet owner would love their pet enough to actually grieve over it. But
that's so true.
I've seen that for some people, I mean, well, I'm a dog lover, so I'm mostly familiar with how dogs are, but the unconditional love you receive from a dog, for some of us, that's like the deepest love we've ever experienced in all of our lives. And when that loss occurs, it's huge. It's so significant.
So significant. Well, statistics show that the loss of a dog, it has more impact on people than a loss of a human. As far as grieving, it's because of that unconditional love. Yeah. It's tough. It's raw. It's tough. It's hope. You know, there's a lot of hopelessness and vulnerability when our dogs die, and other animals too. I see it with cat people too, but that's just what the statistics studied, of course, for dogs.
Well, Wendy, what do you, what tips do you have for someone who, say, has a dying pet, a cat or a dog or some other pet that's in the still alive, but in the process of dying? What do you advise people to do to help their pet, to provide better care to the pet, and then to help themselves as well during that process?
Yeah, you know, to helping their pet. That's a a beautiful thought, Karen, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things, there's so many things, and again, here comes Wendy's famous list, is I have people during the pet hospice time is to make a list of everything that their pet has loved, loves to do, anything, eat, sleep, whatever, just make anything that comes to your mind.
Favorite toys.
Favorite toys.
Yeah.
Anything. And then you make another list of, then you go through that list, Then you go through that list and you cross off, or, you cross off things they can't do anymore or can't eat anymore. And so then you're left with the things that they can do. And so then you take all those and you put them in another column. So then you have something you can work with. Rather, this is another way to work through the grief and to help them feel more comfortable. So, maybe that 5-mile walk isn't going to work anymore, but maybe a walk down the driveway and back is all they need. And, they're like happy as they can be. Finding healthy foods that they can enjoy. Maybe like the way I got started, I will tell you, animals that are in pet hospice absolutely soak up any kind of hands-on work. So whether that's gentle massage or hands-on, or even like gentle music therapy, anything like that. It really, I have seen it over and over and again. It just makes them breathe, It gives them a chance, because there's, our animals, and you and I are dog people, Karen, and our dogs, they are so in tune with us, and they know every move before we know it. And even in their dying days, in their pet hospice days, they're still concerned about us, and they still want to do the best they can for us. They still want to please us. This is the time that we can just love them and give, say, Fluffy, you gave me so much in this world. I want to give to you. So I'm going to get you weekly massages. I'm going to make you bone broth because I know you love it and it's good for you. And I'm going to spend quality time. I mean, I have clients that quit their jobs, or take less hours and to spend time with their animals. And those are the things that are important to do. And if you can take off of work, but spend as much time with them because they need you and they want us to be there with them.
And I would think that would really help with grief also. If you knew, I've done as much as I could. Like, I gave my dog the things I could that he would love to make his last days really special. And I was with him and touching him and holding him and cuddling.
Yes.
And, that would really help ease some of those guilt feelings.
Exactly. It's, again, we come back to the work, it's part of the work of grieving, and you summed it up perfectly. It's just doing all that just helps with the grieving and feeling less guilty and that like you didn't do enough.
Yeah. Well, Wendy, are there some common myths around grief about after the death of a pet? Like, at least what I've seen is that people don't tolerate it very well from coworkers.
No.
Like it doesn't seem like it's just very well understood. And are there some myths that you could help us?
Yes.
Explore?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, myths are my pet peeve, and I talk about them in all of my books. And in a lot of detail on how to recognize them, debunk them, think about them differently, and watch out for them, because there's always new myths popping up. But one of my favorites, if I want to title my favorite, but one of the ones that I guess gets my goat is when people say or think or allude to to the inference that it's selfish and extravagant to mourn and grieve the death of a pet when our world has so much human suffering. Oh my goodness. That just drives me crazy, because as animal lovers, we know how important animals are in our lives. We get that. And the grief that we have surrounding anything, any kind of terminal illness or after they die, whatever, is highly significant and important. People are capable. We are intelligent human beings and empathetic human beings. We are capable of grieving both animals and humans at the same time. So and we don't have, one doesn't detract from the other. So if we're grieving and mourning, which are two different things, grieving and mourning, if we're grieving and mourning our animals, it shows extreme compassion for the world at large. I mean, you see it, right? I mean, the people that love their animals so much, they have compassion for what's going on in the world. And, for whatever it is, animal abuse, world politics, human trafficking, whatever, we get it. So for someone to say to an animal lover that we're selfish or extravagant, that's a myth. And I bring that up because this is one of the most common too. I hear it. People at work are saying that, I'm selfish and I'm only thinking about myself, and, I'm spending too much time and I should get on with it. And, there's kids that need our help. And so starving kids. Oh my goodness. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Loss, death, we need to grieve, and we can do it all. We can do it all. The other one is there's a right and wrong way to grieve. That's another myth. When I help people debunk that myth, and I talk about it more in my books, we all have different relationships with our pet. They're special. And no two people grieve the same way. You may feel sadness. I may feel anger. Okay? People, it's important to know that I'm not going to grieve like you, Karen, because your grief journey is yours and it's unique. It's personal and individual to our experiences that we have. And so it depends on the personality of the pet, the nature of his or her illness, and coping style. We're all so different, and that's the fine tuning of working through the grief. So those are the two that are the most common.
One thing I often hear people giving advice like, well, if your pet died, just go buy another one. Why don't you just go get another dog and then you'll feel better?
Oh my gosh, that's another one. Yes. That's another myth. And that's something that, to try to avoid saying to somebody, because even though we think it may be supportive to somebody to say that, it does take away from the specialness and the importance of that particular pet that has died or is dying. Yeah.
Well, so we know you wouldn't advise someone who's grieving right now to go out and just buy another pet to try to replace
No.
their pet. But do you have advice for those, if there's someone listening right now who's grieving a pet right now? Do you have some advice that you would share?
Oh, on what to do right now if they're grieving? Yeah, that's let's see. The reason why I'm hesitating is that there's a lot of things I can do. And my first piece of advice would be, if you haven't done it already, is to learn what normal grief is. Learn what your emotional feelings of grief are, your physical, your spiritual, all those feelings of normal grief. Learn what they are, know what they are. That alone can really help ease some of the pain, because one thing that we still have in our society is we are still looked at as a little weird when we are grieving a loss of a pet. But by knowing normal grief feelings, it helps. It really helps to know that you're not going crazy.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And again, because we're kind of grief illiterate in many ways in our society, and so we don't talk about it. No one teaches us about it. So we really do have to do the work, as you said before, in order to learn about what's normal when you're grieving.
Exactly. I mean, here are some things that people can look at. For physical, crying, sobbing, even numbness, dry mouth, nausea, those are normal. Some of the intellectual ones is having a sense of unreality. When my first dog died, I felt like I was, on another planet. I felt like I wasn't quite walking on the earth. I felt very light. It was very strange. And of course there's anger, and guilt for the emotional. And sometimes, again, for social feelings, we as pet lovers, we can get that feeling of being isolated or alienated or rejected by others. That's a normal feeling to have. And, it's not weird if you do feel that way. And somebody like a spiritual would be, depending on your belief system, but you might be angry at your deity or your belief system, and and argue with them. You say, how could you possibly make my dog or my cat or my bird or my my horse sick? This is not fair. And I will. This is what I'm going to do. I'll change if you keep my animal alive. All those are normal. They become abnormal when we can't function. So when your anger is so bad, you may be, punching walls or screaming at the gas station attendant or something like that. That's becoming, abnormal, and that's the time to seek professional help with this and not try to do it alone.
And I wanted to just ask you, if you've heard stories like this before. A woman talked to me and told me that her mother died 2 years ago, and she said she hardly cried at all after her mother died, but her dog died a year later, and she said she was totally devastated and couldn't stop crying after her dog died. And she felt embarrassed and ashamed almost that she hadn't cried after her mother's death, but couldn't seem to get over her dog's death. And I think you mentioned that before, that sometimes it's this there's unresolved grief from the prior death, and it all comes at once when you're dealing with the death of a pet.
Yes, I mean, it can be that, for sure. But it also, I mentioned about unique relationships. So maybe this person didn't have that type of, emotional relationship with her mom like she did with her dog. And so, again, that's just the response and, to that relationship. So it's, it can be a many different factors in that. But yeah, for sure, it can be that stacked grief, that unresolved grief. That happened to me, it took, and it happens to all my clients sometimes, it's like some cry right away, some don't cry 6 months later. And it just takes, the right situation for those tears to happen, if they're supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and as you mentioned, it's just a different journey for each one of us, and so we have to just honor our own process, whatever that might be.
Right, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And then along those same lines, what about friends and family members who are watching someone go through grief after the death of a pet? Any suggestions for them of how they might be helpful?
Yeah, for sure. Just listen. Be an active listener. One of the things that we also want to do, because we want to be compassionate, we're people, we're humans, and we want to help, but trying to fix or trying to change or trying to redirect the grief that your friend or family member may be feeling is probably not something that they need. They just need somebody to listen, because pet loss grief, again, it's finding the support team, finding people that get it, finding people that can listen without judgment. So we just need a place to be heard. So that's really important, and to avoid, you mentioned it, it's the, you can get another one, it's only a dog, cat, or horse, you can get another one, or you're still grieving, well, time to get over it. These are things you might be feeling like you're compassionate or helping them, but and I talk about these statements more in my books, but they take away from that person's journey. And it's really important for the grieving person to feel like you're being thoughtful and compassionate, because that will mean so much to them. And, by giving them unconditional love, you're just building that friendship and that support even more. So, those are some of the things that you can do, is basically just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really the best advice. It's the simplest thing possible to do. And even if you're someone who's never had a pet and you can't imagine how it might feel, it doesn't matter. You don't need to imagine it. You need to love your friend and just be with them and be there for them.
Just listen. Yeah. Some of the things, you cook them a healthy dinner. So many of my clients, I say, have you eaten today? No, I haven't eaten today. They don't want to. Who wants to cook when they're grieving? So, cook a bunch of healthy dinners and freeze them so that they can pull them out. Or you can send them flowers, hug them, call them every day. And, the biggest, though, is, just to actively listen and just let them talk. We need that.
Yeah. Would it help to bring, if you have your own pet, would it help to bring your pet over for a visit, a comforting visit, or do you ever find that makes things worse?
That's a good question, Karen. It really depends. And, I've heard from clients both ways. And it depends on the relationships. Like, for instance, a woman I spoke to last week, her dog died. Her friend from the dog park wanted to bring her dog over the house because her dog, she sensed her dog was grieving, and just wanted, some connection, and thought maybe this woman that lost her dog would feel more comfortable. And, it was devastating for this woman. She said, because all I could think about was my dog. And it made my grief worse. But then again, I've heard it the other way, where I can't wait to see Bozo's friend Fluffy, because, you know, I love Fluffy so much, and Fluffy gives me so much love, and I really want to see Fluffy to help my grief. So I've heard, So what a person can do is to say, you know, how would you feel if I brought Fluffy over?
Mm-hmm.
No pressure. You know, if it's not a good time, that's fine, you know, but how would you feel if I brought Fluffy over?
And I love that you mentioned that sometimes the animals are also grieving. They grieve the loss of their friends as well.
Oh, yes, they do. Yeah. I work with people with their animals on that as well. You know, the grieving pet. It's that breaks my heart. You know, I've had my own animals, you know, go through that, and watching that many times. And you know, when I was a equine massage therapist, and one of the horses may have not died, but have left the stable to go to another stable, there was definitely some grieving going around in those barns. Mm-hmm. So yeah, animals do grieve loss, but some do celebrate. I have to say that too, especially if there was one that, you know, picked on the other one, and it's like, oh boy, now my life is my own. That one's gone. So you know.
That's interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I've seen that both ways.
Well, Wendy, I wonder too if you have suggestions for helping children with grief over losing a pet. As I remember, well, as a mom, my kids went through losing goldfish, and then we bought a dog for them, and I really dreaded, like, oh gosh, what will it be like when our dog dies? But actually, my kids were both older and away from home when the dog died. I was the one who dealt with the grief over the dog dying. But that's something I thought about a lot. Like, what will I do? How will I help my kids if this dog dies?
Yeah, that's great, because we have an opportunity, and I talk a lot about it in my book, Healing a Child's Pet Loss Grief, a guide for parents. And you know, what do you do? You know, how do you deal with this? But children are naturally curious, as we all know, and they want to know how things work. And they can experience stages of grief and loss just like we do. And depending on their age, there's different comprehension levels. So this gives us as adults a tremendous opportunity to teach kids about life and death, and change the whole paradigm of the death and how we look at death and dying in our society, to be more resilient as they age, and more, you know, being able to recognize it and deal with it and manage it and work through it. So one tip I give is, depending on this is all age dependent, okay? Of course. Mm-hmm. Honesty is critical when talking about death to a child. I mean, I will never forget this. My grandfather died, and my mom and dad said he went to sleep. You know, he and it was like, and he'll never wake up. And, you know, that's probably, you know, that's fearful.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, as a kid, you know, oh my gosh. Then, you know, the next question is from the kid is, well, if I fall asleep, will I wake up? So it might not feel like a big deal, but these are the things how fear and not able to deal with grief gets stacked from a very early age. You know, we don't have to talk about the gory details, but using experiences like seeing a leaf, a leaf that is dead on the ground in the fall. You know, talk about the life cycle, know about the life cycle, explain the life cycle. The other tip is carefully allow emotions of grief to be shown in front of your children. Carefully is the big word here. It's not appropriate for all out expressions of grief. And again, age appropriate, but this is pretty general. So if you need to be, screaming hysterically into a pillow, I would not suggest doing that with a child. However, it's very healthy to cry, talk about what is normal grief, and show that it's okay to cry, it's okay to be upset, it's okay to have depression, it's okay to be angry. These are all normal, and it's okay to show some of these things carefully. The other tip I have is to, of course, help, guide and support in any way you can your child through any grief feelings that they may have. And to do that, knowing what your own feelings, knowing what grief is, knowing how you feel about death and the cycle of life, and your attitudes about the cycle of life, because whatever way you feel will affect your child in the future. Mm-hmm. And a pet is a wonderful way to teach children about the cycle of life in a very supportive and an honest and hopeful, hopefully not scary way. Mm-hmm. And I talk about that more in detail in my book. So in giving people, actual things to say and do and so on and so forth. So
do you recommend having funerals for pets? Do you find that to be helpful?
Oh, big time. Kids love to do funerals for their pets. It's so cute. I mean, some of the things that they come up with are just absolutely adorable. Just the pictures and the candles and the altars, and it's the celebration of life that kids come up with are just amazing, and it's extremely healthy. Extremely healthy to let. One thing I mentioned before is grieving and mourning are two different things. We oftentimes put everything's in a lump sum. It's important, and again, this even goes for the kids. Grieving is our feelings. It's our inward relationship to the death and dying process. Mourning is our outward expression. So those are things like creating memorials, creating funerals, creating eulogies, writing love letters. All of those things are ways to mourn. That's not something somebody usually does right away, because the grieving needs to take hold and have its relationship with us. But once the grieving then morphs into mourning, and kids are really good at the mourning process. We can learn a lot from them. We can definitely learn a lot from them as far as being creative.
Yeah. Oh, so that's a great suggestion then, is let kids plan the funeral and hold it. Well, I want to remind listeners that I'm talking with Wendy Van de Poll, who is an end-of-life and pet grief support coach. And if you go to her website, centerforpetlossgrief.com, you'll find lots of resources there. Wendy has a number of great books about My Dog is Dying, My Dog Has Died, also cat dying and has died already, Healing a Child's Pet Loss Grief, The Pet Professional's Guide to Pet Loss. So you can find all of those resources. And then, Wendy, I know you have a new book that just recently came out.
Yes, I'm really excited about this one, Karen.
Yeah,
so excited. Yeah, it's called Pet Loss Poems, Healing Your Heart and Soul. And the journey, I never thought of myself as a poet. And I'm probably never going to win any awards on my poetry, but what I found was over the years, as I was working with people and to manage my own grief so that I could be fully present for my clients, after each session, poetry would start coming into my head. Not every single one, but I have about 100 poems written, and in this book there's 41 poems of my favorites. And so I would write poems about the animal, the relationship these people had with their animal, the relationship I had with the animal, and the poetry helped me with my loss of this animal. And so I decided one day, a friend of mine said, why aren't you putting these into a book? This would help so many people. So I did. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'd encourage listeners, go to the website centerforpetlossgrief.com so you can check out those books and check out the brand new book of pet loss poems. And then, Wendy, also it looks like you offer grief support services, animal medium sessions, and other services that people can acquire as well through your website.
Yes, I offer the pet loss grief support. I work with veterinarians and pet care professionals. I'm race certified through the Veterinarian Society, and help veterinarians around the country manage compassion fatigue and burnout. I also offer online courses, and I will be offering soon, probably the beginning of the year, live webinars on some courses for pet loss grief, animal communication, and so on and so forth.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you have a wealth of information to share, Wendy, and I want to thank you for your work, and thanks for joining me and talking with me today.
Thank you, Karen. I really enjoyed being on your show and having you invite me on to be on your show. It was really nice. Thank you.
Yes, it's been great. So until we talk again sometime in the future, I'll say goodbye.
Okay, bye, Karen.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Wendy Van de Poll and also found it useful and helpful to you. Be sure and share it with other people who might also benefit from listening. If you know anyone who's dealing with grief after the death of a pet right now. And tune in again next week. I'll be back with more interviews for you. So until then, take care and be well.